In a recent interview with Radio Times, Stephen Moffat has decided to put his foot in his mouth one last time. As if the current climate around Doctor Who wasn't already divisive enough. He just couldn't help himself. Now, time for my usual disclaimer. I don't have a problem with a female Doctor as long as it makes narrative sense. My concern is that the casting of Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor was not done for this reason. Rather, it is becoming more and more evident that this casting decision was made purely for ideological reasons and to adhere to BBC equity quotas. Now, on with the article. Moffat claims that, when he asked crowds about a female Doctor, he made it, quote, clear that this was not about politics or feminism. Well, Moffat, if we look at your writing, particularly during the Capaldi era, it is clear that this was about politics and feminism, because you seem to have made this the main drive of the show during the final years of your era. He claims that, in the beginning, not that many people were keen on the idea. Well, judging by the response, I would argue that many people still aren't that keen on the gender change. He then goes on to argue that while he could have cast a woman after Matt Smith, he, quote, got obsessed with Peter Capaldi being the Doctor, and has no regrets about that. Well, Moffat, this is what is called meritocracy. Capaldi was the best actor for the role at the time. At least, you weren't like Chris Chibnall, and you considered all options. He then goes on to argue that Missy was the last piece of the puzzle, and then references the, quote, general regenerating into a black woman. Oh no, Moffat. That wasn't ideological or political at all, was it? Considering the first words out of her mouth were a direct attack on the male ego. Then, the interview goes into absurd territory, and we get another glimpse of Moffat's political leanings, which explains so much of his tenure as showrunner. In referring specifically to his decision to cast Peter Capaldi, he states, quote, we have to worry about what our Daily Mail readers are going to say. I thought you said your choices weren't political. You're kind of contradicting yourself here. That's not the same person. This isn't a show exclusively for progressive liberals. Well, you could have fooled me. This is also a show for people who voted Brexit. Really, Moffat, you're actually going to characterize everyone who isn't entirely in favor of a female Doctor as a Brexit voter. There are no other possible reasons at all. If you read between the lines, it seems that Moffat is taking one last stab at a large portion of the show's viewing audience, a portion which he traditionally seems to hold in contempt or just pretends doesn't exist. As for the 13th Doctor, he states that the decision was made because, quote, more and more of the audience were asking for it. Really? Well, certain segments of the audience wanted it, and unfortunately, that seems to be the only portion that Chibnall and the BBC actually listened to, because that is the portion that fits their own agenda. Next, he addresses the idea of changing the Doctor back to a man. It's hard to tell whether the interviewer is being serious here or not. Quote, woe betide the first person who changes her back to him. Moffat's response, I'd like to think that in the future we'll stop worrying about things like that. What we've done is potentially double the number of people who can play the part. Actually, given how progressive the BBC has become, changing the Doctor back would go against their own ideological imperatives. Woe betide indeed. Then he talks about the transition, and mentions that in 2009 he was still largely working with the same team as Russell T Davies and Julie Gardner, but this time it's, quote, mostly a new team. Well, yes. I guess we can only have those that are 100% loyal to the new ideological regime. Then Moffat puts on his rose-colored glasses, so to speak, and claims that the show is in a good place. He claims that, quote, people talk a lot of bollocks about ratings and stuff. They're not adding on iPlayer. Well, Moffat, the final consolidated figures, which do include iPlayer, demonstrate that the ratings for the show have been steadily declining since you took over, and then fell off a cliff during Series 10. He also says there's a huge amount of enthusiasm about Jodie. Well, but then you also pretend that naysayers don't exist. I guess, in your own mind, this is overwhelming enthusiasm. I could also convince myself that I'm a carrot, but that doesn't make it a reality, does it? In terms of the show being radically different, he thinks Chibnall will be, quote, bold. That's his nature, and he'd think the time has arrived to be bold. Well, I guess if being bold means potentially driving the show into the ground, then I guess we're being bold. As you know, Chibnall hasn't refuted any concerns about his direction for the show, at this point anyway, and one could argue, although perhaps not definitively, that this demonstrates that all these concerns are justified. Bold, yes. Bold enough to put your own ideological beliefs before a show that has been around for 54 years. Bold enough to alienate half its fan base. Yes, this is bold, but not in a good way. Well, Moffat, time for you to go. Luckily, he says he's ready to write a line under Doctor Who. Probably a good thing. Moffat, well, you have written many great episodes of New Who. Only 2 of your 6 series are what I would call good. I'm sure you've convinced yourself that your era was the golden age of Who. Well, not really. But, if nothing else, if our fears come true, it may be a golden age compared to what is coming. And that's all for today. So as always, everyone, thank you for watching, and have a good day.